Welcome to our Neighborhood Exchange. My name is Caitlin Klosser-Pert. I'm the Director of Public Programming at United Way of Metro Chicago, and we're so pleased to welcome you to this installment of the Neighborhood Exchange, Food Disruptors, How Innovation and Sustainability Are Feeding Our Neighbors. We'd love to get a sense of who is in the virtual room, so we'd love if you could type into the chat just your name and the organization that you're representing today, your workplace. And then if you want to share what brings you here this morning as well, we'd love to get a sense of everyone who's here. So welcome. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this morning's event. Ruby Ferguson is joining us from her two hats that she wears. She is the Chicago Food Equity Policy Lead for the City of Chicago Mayor's Office, and then also the Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships at Greater Chicago Food Depository. We're so pleased to have you with us, Ruby. Welcome. Thanks.
Thank you so much, and it's such an honor to be here today. I'm so excited to have this conversation with such innovative leaders on such a topic that's so close to my heart. While we were getting ready to kind of launch this panel, we were talking about the power of food and what a fundamental human right it is, but how disheartening it can be when we see the disproportionate rates of food insecurity that occur across the city and have higher rates in communities of color in particular. And with those inequities, we also see kind of things that don't make sense, right? So high levels of food waste, but people still experiencing hunger on the daily. But with all of that, there's an opportunity to think about a pathway forward and how we can disrupt the status quo and think about how we can transform our food system into one that's more just and equitable. And there's a quote that I always think about from one of my favorite poets, Cleo Wade, that is, we are the builders who are building a world that has never been built before. And that requires disruption, innovation, creativity. And so I'm so honored today to speak with builders, dreamers, disruptors that are thinking about how Chicago's food system can better serve our community. So first, let me introduce Dion Dawson, a son of the Inglewood community and founder of Dion's Chicago Dreams, which provides fresh food through delivery and their dream fridge. Dion is also a graduate of the Responsible Business Leaders, another partnership between United Way and the Boom Heart Center. I also want to introduce Aisha Butler, who's another Inglewood resident and co-founder and CEO of the Resident Association of Greater Inglewood, where she serves as a leader and helps bring Go Green on Racine to her neighborhood. And last but definitely not least, I would like to introduce Lieutenant Jermaine Harris, who's a community policing lieutenant with the Chicago Police Department, where he explores non-traditional policing roles and explores the connection between food insecurity and safety. He was born in the Austin community and currently resides in North Lawndale. Our panel conversation will run until 9:30, and then we'll invite you to join a breakout room where each of us will be in the room and we'll be able to answer some questions. We'll also have two leaders from two additional organizations leading other innovative efforts from New Life and Vivery. We're so excited that we're in a city where there are so many food innovators, and so we'll have to find a way to continue to include more folks into this conversation. But now let's dive into the conversation with our three panelists. So maybe let's start, and I love the title of a disruptor and thinking about what it means to be disruptive. And so I'd love to ask each of you, how do you see your work as a positive disruption to our existing food system?
I guess I'll go first. Good morning, everybody. Dion Dawson, Dion's Chicago Dream. And in relation to the current food system, I mean, the first disruption is acknowledging equity and the lack thereof. And so when you're looking at our current food system, a lot of times Black and Brown communities are bystanders or are not involved. And when we're talking about having a voice when decisions are made, knowing how to feed our residents, knowing not only what they like to eat or what they deserve to have access to, but making sure that their voice is centered in whatever decisions that are being made. And so with Dion Chicago Dream, first and foremost, me being a Black resident of Inglewood, but also being a food leader, I think it's extremely important to show, that disruption in equity. And then when we're talking about the revenue, when we're talking about food and even just food distribution in philanthropy, the market cap is 400 million in the state. And of that, over 95% goes to only 4 organizations that are not, that do not have leaders of color. And so when we're talking about what we're doing, we want to make sure that our programming, our disruption is anchored in actual impact, and that we're holding ourselves accountable to do what we say we're doing. And so that disruption is also tied directly to our daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly impact. And I think that's something that I'm extremely grateful of and proud of for our team and our residents for allowing us to do it.
Want to go? Okay, I'll go next. Good morning, everyone. I think from a standpoint of disruption, the space that I try and create impact really is in the disruption of the narrative, right? Of what we understand food security, insecurity to mean, who we understand as the individuals who are affected by it, who do we really see as those who are really charged to bring an end to hunger. Also, from that standpoint, like each of us who, regardless of the sector or the career path that we may have taken, has a role, right, within creating food security. So specifically, like on the surface, what does public safety, right, connect? How does that connect to food security? I think one of those ways that it really brought attention to me and understanding the roles that we all should play came from the pandemic. I think, like so many of us, we had a belief or an understanding of what those who were suffering from an insecurity of food looked like, or their experiences. But so much of our nation and our country got to see firsthand that it could be anyone, right? There is no prototypical or of how inequities manifest. And so during the pandemic, if we remember the shelter in place order, how we were all like stocking up on items and secured in our homes, one of those things we started to think about from a public safety standpoint is, what about those most vulnerable, specifically our seniors who may be on fixed income, who couldn't go out in the middle of the month and stock up on items. So what we did was really in conversations of figuring out ways to best support our safety as a whole, our officers really built relationships with our food pantries and our food providers. And we had to pivot some of our role into providing delivery of groceries, right, to the homes of seniors who weren't able to get out. And so seeing that and understanding the impact of what that meant, soon my social media, right, I started getting like instant messages about, hey, I'm here, but my mom lives in Austin, or, I'm out of town. Can you go by and check on her? And seeing just the need of how it affected so many people. And it's like, hey, there's a role that I can play in that. And I think each of us really possess that ability to start disrupting the narrative as to what this problem looks like. And then specifically, who has a responsibility of fixing it. And I think that lies on all of us.
Really building upon what Jermaine and Dion just said, we're a neighborhood association. And so sometimes our responses shift and evolve. And I do know I want to go back to the COVID pandemic that we had, where we had to immediately jump in and do exactly what Jermaine said, and actually contact our members, find out what their greatest needs were, and overwhelmingly heard that food was an issue at that time. And so we were, like Dion, the Chicago Dream, we were actually delivering food to our seniors, to our most vulnerable population during that time. And I do know that was a positive disruption. And then going back to some of the decision making and how food shows up in our community, I think Rage has been very intentional to make sure to center resident voices, to make sure that they are heard in regards to the options that come to our neighborhood and also the options that leave our neighborhood. And then I think our journey started probably a decade ago in partnership with Iman, the Inner City Muslim Action Network, when we were doing a corner store campaign, because in actuality, many of our corner stores are places where people get food, right? This is where they shop. This is where they need to get their things for their meals that evening. And to walk into a corner store and just see such a deplorable display of food kind of was where we kind of started our work about 10 years ago. And that transformed to actually helping to build out our own kind of corner store. I say tricking out a corner store too, so that when you first walk in, it is bright, it is welcoming, it is fresh food. People are, mingling with each other. So using what we do have and looking at those as potential assets, because they are needed from residents. People like to walk to their local stores, and being able to do that was a huge disruptor that we continue to do with our work.
Thank you all so much. I think it's really powerful. There are some through lines that came through kind of each of you brought up. So thinking about equity as a foundation for disruption and leaning in on justice, kind of collective transformation and leaning on how we can shift power dynamics, which I think is really incredible to think about, and where true disruption can occur. And then this piece around agency and centering community voice and making sure that folks have say in their food experiences. And so I'm wondering, all of your work is incredibly rooted in community. And I'm wondering if you could share a little bit more about what you're hearing from the communities you work in and how you lift up those voices and kind of disrupt your approaches in addressing food insecurity.
I went first last time, so y'all not gonna make me look rude. So.
I was gonna jump in.
Yep, let's go.
I was gonna jump in if they wanted me to start. Well, I know right now Inglewood is dealing with an issue around recent departure of Whole Foods Market. And for folks who don't know, who have so many different narratives about what happened in that case, the residents in Inglewood and the organizations here and the leaders really had a say in how Whole Foods showed up in Inglewood, how they entered the community, who got hired at their space, how education of food and organic products and all those things were important. And I would be remiss not to shout out like the Teamwork Inglewoods and the Greater Inglewood CDC and some of the other, organizations who really made sure that this kind of foreign retailer that was very foreign to Inglewood really fit into the thread and the fabric of Inglewood. Now, fast forward to today, we didn't exit so well. So Amazon bought Whole Foods, community leadership, a community engagement department was dismantled. And so now we're kind of left with like no connection to one of our, higher grocery store retailers. So now we're in this conversation around what happens at this location, and kind of was forced, or at least we made sure that we wasn't forced to receive Save-A-Lot, which is probably one of the lower retailers as it relates to grocery stores. And we have went to their stores. We have did site visits, and I think residents made sure that they heard that their products are not up to par, that we want something different. And then that work is continuing on through the 16th Ward Grocery Store Steering Committee. But then on another faction that we did that was that we were talking about a little bit today is really working through development and transforming the intersection of 63rd and Racine from a regular corner store to now just a place where people gather and know that they can get fresh products or fresh fruit or smoothies or whatever the case may be. Those are all like, even though it's activism and happening and push back against this local retailer, we also can sit and brag about Go Green Fresh Market. We can brag about Dion's Chicago Dream. We can brag about Growing Homes and so many other actors within our community who are making sure, regardless of what happens at 63rd and Halsted or with any retailer, that people are still eating. And I'll move it over to Dion.
You see what she did, Jermaine? She picked me. That's what, like, you saw that. No, I'm joking. But yeah, when you talk about this work, I think everybody on this panel and some of the people that I've interacted with on the call, they know this is my passion. So, I've irritated quite a few people on this call before. But also, in terms of this work, this is exactly what Beyond Chicago Dream is about. And so because of our need to not only center the recipient and also look at food insecurity as something that has evolved, let's anchor, this call in a few facts about food insecurity. The first thing is that, since the 50s or 60s, the pantry model has been the only way we've, for the most part, addressed food insecurity. Now, you add that in with, systemic racism, you add that in with, lack of access and lack of opportunity. And then you throw in a pandemic and all of this other stuff, and you have a system that has evolved and a need that has evolved with nothing that applies. And so with Beyond Chicago Dream, we took that Amazon approach, we took that HelloFresh model, and we created something that allows us to get a week's worth of fresh produce directly to the resident. Because when we're talking about centering the resident voice, when we're talking about centering those in need, a lot of people look at innovation as if it's something that you have to create new. Innovation is also looking at something that has 30 parties involved and 15 different steps and maybe simplifying it. And so because of that, because of, in my heart as a leader, I am an Inglewood resident, I see that a lot of times we have systems that don't talk to the residents. Well, at our organization, every household receives a 15-day touch point, no matter where you are. We're in 27 Chicagoland neighborhoods. We're at 33,000 pounds per month, but it always starts from us communicating back and forth with who we're serving. So now when you talk about how we organically get into other neighborhoods, it's through those people in need. And so when you go from centering that voice to starting a logistical operation, I think everyone on this call can admit that when the pandemic happened, there was a glaring hole where? Logistics. So now we have that opportunity in 2020 to build out a logistical response. And we've done that. We've been able to get to these neighborhoods. We own all of our delivery sprinters, and we pay our residents. And I think when you're talking about innovation, I want everyone on this call to understand something, that innovation has to involve opportunity. And when we're talking opportunity, we've created 19 positions where we've hired community members, paying them at least $20 an hour. So when you're talking about innovation, it cannot come at the result of residents volunteering time or donating food. We have to stabilize that quality. We have to stabilize that access. And then we have to always have open lines of communication, because no matter what, whether or not Rage or Teamwork Inglewood or Beyond Chicago Dream approaches a problem different ways, there's a synergy and a respect and a love there, because it's always about the resident. And that's what we have to remember in terms of where we are now and where we move forward. And so, with Beyond Chicago Dream, at the heart of what we're doing, there's a leader in this organization and myself who is just a resident. And I love the fact that I approach this from that lens, because it allows us to not overlook those small things that really give respect and space and grace to the residents that we love and say we care about. And I guess I got to pick Jermaine, because that's what Aisha said.
So in that, I kind of want to just, I think, keep a flow of the conversation going from Aisha and Dion. I'm specifically talking about it as they speak about this concept of community, people who are directly impacted, just to uplift where we center this work and how important it is specifically to connect relationships, right? When you overlay, if you take maps of Chicago and you overlay inequity, you can go from unemployment to food insecurity to violence. It's the same locations. It's specifically in our South and West Side communities. And so when we start to think about what are the ways in which we somehow support or make a dent in these problems, is really through the relationships. Because of systemic racism, inequity historically, and we talk about, the trust is not there, right? A product, a service that could literally change someone's life, it may be walked past or ignored because the trust within the system. And I think it goes right back into us who may not be leading right food delivery like Dion here, may not be direct advocates of the work like Aisha. There's a role we all possess in creating and helping to build access. And that is through the relationships. So one of the projects that we work on the West Side is Chicago West Side Police and Youth Sports. And so in that, it's this opportunity, again, healthy communities are safer communities. So we try to work with young people to put them on a path towards physical fitness, towards better nutrition. And what you run into is that you're asking a person to keep their bodies fit, but without that access to food that's required to run those bodies, right? We're counterproductive into that mission, right? We've seen this, right? If you spend time on the South or West Side neighborhoods and you come out in the morning at 8, 9 a.m. on kids on their way to school, what are they eating? They're eating snacks and chips and high sugar. They're putting these things in their bodies. So what can we do to help support access? So one of the things we started doing at Chicago West Side Sports was at practices, we provided hot meals for the young people, right? And not only does that show them how to eat certain items the right way, right? It's like, I don't like broccoli, or I don't like carrots, or whatever it may be. I don't like vegetables. Sometimes it's in the preparation, right, of how we prepare it. But it starts to get them connected to foods that they may not have been exposed to or may not have been aware of, right? And that education process is essential, because as we start to change systems and we create healthy food options, we create these resources, are we also supporting people to understand and raise their awareness as to why these items are better for us, right? So along the way, I always want to make sure we I want to connect, because I'm not a person who's doing the work on the day-to-day, but I am a person who can help build access. And I think every one of us can do that in some way, right? We're seeing problems, we're seeing these challenges. What are the opportunities for us to connect our current existing relationships to the work of people like these two that are here, because they need our help, right? There's only so much staff and people that Aisha and Dion have on hand, and in the concept of asking people in communities to volunteer time, asking people to make these concessions to help build it up. But there's many of us that are in these positions of privilege where we have that luxury of spending the time that's necessary. We have that privilege of relationships in power structures that we can be advocates for. We can speak up for these causes, because that's the thing that's essential. And I try to do that work within public safety concepts. We'll talk a little bit more about this, of how that narrative disruption, how that access building, that we absolutely need to connect public safety to nutrition, because these things are so tightly wound because of that overlay of the map that I talked about, right? We're looking at all these issues that are happening in the same spaces. It's not a downtown Chicago issue. It's not what we're seeing on the news. It's not those problems that they're telling us what we should be focusing on, but it's in these areas that have been neglected for so long is where our attention must go and where it has to be placed. Because if we want to make a difference around food security, we need to go to the heart of where these problems are happening. We need to go into those neighborhoods and be okay with supporting Black Chicago. Be okay with saying that, saying the words equity, being okay with saying systemic racism, white supremacy, where we have to be okay with saying those words, because if we don't label it, how are we truly going to be able to support it? So just want to always bring things back to community and back to relationships, because that's where it all starts.
Jermaine, thank you. And thank you to all the panelists. I want to challenge you, though, and say that you do the work every day, echoing your point around relationships and that it takes a collective to get there. And I think, when I tell people what I do for a living, I think they're going to get this kind of lighthearted conversation. And then I quickly go, oh, you want to talk about food security? Well, we have to talk about racism and poverty. Are you ready to have that conversation? And I think we called all of that out, but I would like for us to take a moment and dig a little bit deeper and talk about the intersectionalities that we see in the work that we do, in how we're addressing, and I want to take it a step beyond food insecurity and saying food justice. And so, yeah, let's maybe unpack some of that a little bit more and make those dot connections, because I think true disruption lies in us finding the synergies between those spaces and not just thinking narrowly around it's just a food issue. And so let's use this model that's just thinking about distributing food, but kind of going back to Dion's point of how are we building wealth in community? How are we centering community voice there? So Jermaine, I'm going to kick it to you.
All right, I'll go first in the rotation, then I get to pick who's next. So the word justice, right? You point out, as soon as you said that, all my lights click off, and I was like, all right, here we go. Here's the connection. So when we think about justice, specifically social justice, whatever you want to add into it, right? These two essential points come up, I think, and that is around access and equity, right? These are essential things that so much of, as we understand violence, I'll talk about, from the violence connection piece, so much of we understand around gun violence, like so many of the reasons why a person participates in violence are led to issues around equity and access, right? We can see the act itself, but it's never that thing that we're watching or witnessing, that carjacking, whatever it may be, is a culmination of a whole lot of things that have happened, specifically failures and inequity that have happened in a person's life to get them to that point. But we often want to figure out, let's go to the end and let's figure out how we directly solve this person or fix this person versus correcting the system. And that's a context issue, right? From a justice standpoint, it's not always the person that's the problem, right? It's not this specific person we can feed this one person, but at some point we must address systemic issues in order to prevent these things from happening. Because what we see in our communities is that there's a lot of people that are being traumatized, that are going through these issues and concerns and problems, whatever it may be, that are living their lives. And when do we see them, right? Is it when they become a problem to us? Is it a lot taken from the pandemic? Do we now recognize food and the importance of nutrition because we have felt that, right? Because of our little small moment in time, right? Now we can see these issues. So from a justice standpoint, it is no way we can just pluck out one particular item, one particular cause, and think that will affect a systemic issue. And so I think that's what, just pushing it back again to this concept of every one of our sectors has a role to play in creating these circumstances. When we look at housing and we look at economics, I'm from North Lawndale, right? Redlining was one of those epicenters where redlining occurred, and we see the effects of how you contain a group of people and strip resources from them. And now to this day, right, decade after decade, historically, we don't see that support coming into communities. We're looking at vacant land. Now, while I'm watching and I can look straight down Madison or straight down one of the streets towards downtown, there's cranes everywhere. But in my neighborhood, the land is vacant. So these are talking about making investments. And so coming and bringing it back to the food piece and to the nutrition, right, of this concept. So as we think about what are those solutions, if we're listening to the things that Aisha and Dion are talking about, these solutions will work in every single sector. It is a healthcare, it is a business, it is an economic solution when we start thinking about improving access and creating equity. So from a police officer standpoint, from a person who's working within public safety, I align myself with the work around food and nutrition because I know 100% positively that as we make advances in these spaces, we will also make advances in the work that I do. So now I'm gonna pass it to Aisha.
I got to go back to the question. You were so good, Jermaine, because you took a lot of things that I was going to say, but no, this is perfect. I think what Jermaine brings up, and that we have to uplift that, is that the harm that has been done to redline communities. So yes, we're talking about food. Yes, we're talking about disruption. But when you think of the overwhelming harm that has been done in these communities, it also gives you a starting point of healing. Right. And so I think we said earlier today that food and health, all of this is a part of being healed, being healthy. Just like if I was to eat a burger, I don't eat beef, but if I ate a burger today, I would want to go to sleep. But if I ate a smoothie with some ginger and some turmeric, I'm up and ready to save the day and talk about the day. So I think as we think about our communities who are redlined, they are unhealthy. Right. And so when you also bring in corporate institutions or, other food services that are not necessarily healing or really truly feeding the soul of the residents here who have harm, we're really just going back and forth in a circle and really not addressing the real issue. What has happened in Inglewood, and where, me and both of Deanna from Inglewood and live in this community, we see the harm firsthand, just like Jermaine said. We see the harm of housing. We see the harm of our vacant schools. We see the harm of a vacant grocery store. We see the harm of vacant land everywhere. So it's this theme around abandonment, vacancies. And so I think and we don't want to, change the tone here, but I think what is really exciting is that when you see a Dion or a Jermaine or Aisha or groups like Iman who say, you know what, we understand it's harm here, but it's some hope as well. And when we talk to the residents and really figure out what are those hope points, how do we keep continuing to do that? How do we sustain that? I think then you have a vibrant community, regardless of what the physical attributes look like. When I think about what's happening at 63rd and Halsted and all the work that was put into that place, and now us as a community aligning together, united, and really examining what a store like Save a Lot has really brought to our community. Has it helped us? Has it healed us? And then how do we make sure that if it's harmed us, which it has, that something else is an alternative? And I know folks are like, you guys do it. You build your own grocery store. Going back to what Jermaine said, it's not that easy for places and for people of color to have the capital, sometimes the know-withal to operate a grocery store. We could do it, but not on a scale to get $13.5 million from the city, and not on a scale to scale nationally. We're just not there. But I think the message that we want to make clear is that our voices matter. We would not accept expired food. We would not accept rotten food. And we were going to always eyeball and hold these kind of corporations accountable who could care less about sometimes communities like Inglewood or Woodlawn or North Lawndale. And so I don't know if that answered the question, but that's just my thoughts building upon what Jermaine said.
Gotcha. I'm talking to Aisha and Jermaine. I had to write a couple things down because I think we all kind of, the brain start, shooting out. But when we're talking about food justice, I think we want to kind of get it back to the food system. And I think that everyone on this call, I think that their introduction into the food system should be multifaceted and multi-tiered. I think we have to stop entering into this and succumbing to this idea of just what the food system is and shift to what it could be. Thinking that, Black and brown communities' only participation in the food system is from a pantry is from a deficit mindset, and it doesn't really look at, the potential that we have in front of us. And so when we're talking about justice, we're talking about, empowered, we're talking about active, and we're talking about accountable. And so being empowered is understanding, looking at the food system as a whole. Are we talking about farming? Are we talking about logistics? Are we talking about retail? Are we talking about philanthropy? How do you want to interact with the food system? Active is understanding this. I'm in this food system because I refuse to think that I'm powerless. I saw something, and the only thing we've done as an organization is found more people who can work with us to be effective and impactful. And I think that's where we kind of have to make sure that that is our true north. Our true north is making sure that when we're talking about equity, we're not waiting for something to be given to us. We're working toward getting it and maintaining it ourselves. And then we're talking about the end result being resident-centered, data-centered, and action-based. And so, I want to bring up, justice, and even Jermaine and Aisha touched on it. We have to make sure that, what data are you using to inform your decisions? One thing that we realized early on here at Dion Chicago Dream was that a lot of the data was not accurate, but also it was hand-picked data to serve the purpose of whatever organization that was collecting it. And so when we talk about a lot of the metrics that are collected, what I like to look at is not only the metrics that are collected, but the metrics that aren't collected. We love to talk about how many food insecure people or residents there are in Cook County, and we talk about how we feed them. Well, what's the number of people that come back? How many times do we feed them after that initial feeding? You know what I mean? How are we holding ourselves accountable to being resident-centered, data-centered, and action-based? And so making sure that on a daily basis, when we're talking about food justice, that we're learning, we're applying, and we're connecting every single day so that we can really build on this and build towards something that is more equitable, that is justice centered, and is something that we're proud of. The only thing I try to do every day is to make sure that if I'm in a room, if I'm in a conversation, and our residents and our recipients was listening in, they would be proud, they would agree, and they would understand that we're a reflection of them, not them being a reflection of us.
Thank you all so much. And like, yes, Dion, as like a trained dietitian, I think it's so important to ground in data and how we frame stories about Black folks in particular, and where the root of that data comes from, and like giving context behind that. So appreciate you elevating that, and have so many other questions, but I think it would be helpful to kind of dive in and learn more about each of your work. And so Dion, you know, as an entrepreneur, maybe take a step back and tell us a little bit about Dion's Chicago Dreams and how you grew it, and just tell us about the journey.
Oh, absolutely. Well, Dion's Chicago Dreams started, as most people know, with the community fridge in Inglewood, and it has kind of grown into a social enterprise that, you know, is not only poised for more exponential growth, but also is doing something unheard of, not only in philanthropy, but in the country. Our model is based around understanding that logistically, we have to make sure that we're able to get directly to those people. And we're using logistics, and we're using, well, we have logistics, and we're using food as a demonstration project. So for us as an organization, it started just with a question. You know, if we don't, as a 5-month-old org in 2020, how do we feed people if we don't have a brick and mortar location? And from that question alone, it allowed us to really create a model where we only deliver food that we buy. We don't shy away from retail activity, and we don't shy away from donations, grants, and corporate partnerships, because we're really doing work that has allowed us to really stabilize access and quality. And what we mean by that is we just recently passed 500,000 pounds of fresh produce provided since 2020. We've never given out a piece of produce that was donated to us. We've decided to take a hard line in buying that produce, but also when we talk about access, it's funny because when you feed somebody one time, you're not solving food insecurity, you're fighting hunger. When we talk about that access piece, it was extremely, extremely important for us to really make sure that we're holding ourselves accountable to stabilizing access. And so what we've been able to do is we've been able to do these weekly deliveries to the tune of more than 800 homes in 27 Chicagoland neighborhoods as of this week. And over the course of the next year, we're going to do 58,000 in-home deliveries while also doing 25,000 verbal touch points over the phone. And so understanding that we understand that a lot of times in food insecurity, the resident voice is lost. And so we just built an organization that really reflects the problem now and how we could really use the technology and the innovation that has happened since the 60s to, you know, kind of fuel and power what we have now into the future. And as a result, we've been able to not only feed people and have them enrolled into a program where their income requirement, their income level is not a requirement at all. We don't ask that question because that question really started from people getting government funding. But now it has become something that everyone in the food space, they're asking, well, you know, how much do you make? Well, we don't ask that here at Dion's Chicago Dream. We don't hoard data. We ask them to get them enrolled into our waiting list. And then ultimately on our deliveries, we ask name, address, phone number, and how many people in the household, because their data is important and it should not be sold to the highest bidder. And so as a result from that, we've been able to get into all these communities just from people sharing through word of mouth. A lot of people on this call know that we have a robust social media communications plan. But if you notice, we've been very intentional about not putting signups on our website or on our social media, because we don't want the geriatric community to miss out, or those who lack consistent broadband access. And so when you're looking at our data is showing us that our average recipient is 54 years old. Our average household size is 5.27 residents. 63% of our households are multi-generational. And so when you're talking about the data that we can collect across this robust amount of households, now we're beginning to paint a new picture of what food insecurity looks like, but also what the path to solving it can look like. And that's what our organization has been about. And that's what we've been able to grow, is a solution and not us just addressing that there is a problem.
Thank you, Dion. And if you don't follow Dion on LinkedIn, you should. I think he's the most active person I know on LinkedIn.
Oh no, they need to follow us everywhere. Oh no.
Everywhere. Sorry,
LinkedIn,
my bad.
of course.
All socials.
Yeah, I need to follow
I'm
us
showing
everywhere.
my age. All socials.
Yeah, okay.
My bad,
That's
Dion.
okay.
My bad.
Everybody, no ageism. I'm not agreeing with that. Y'all not gonna cancel me today. So yeah, everybody, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. Y'all can even email them, DionChicagoDream@gmail.com. Okay.
There we go.
And then I'm gonna pass it to Aisha, because they've been passing it to each other and I've been getting jealous. No, I'm joking.
Well, actually, that's perfect. And Aisha, I think, Dion was kind of talking about solutions and being solution oriented. And I would love for you to tell us more about bringing Go Green on Racine and the work that Rage did with that. And if y'all need something to do this weekend, please go to Go Green on Racine and buy some delicious food and get your groceries for the week or for your barbecue. But Aisha, tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah, so thank you, and I'll pass it along. So again, for folks who don't know, we are a resident association. It was 13 of us who founded Rage, who live in this community, who wanted to make sure that resident voice was amplified. And that shows up in a lot of different spaces. And it shows up through development, it shows up through education, it shows up through food. Sometimes people are like, oh, Rage is all over the place, but we have residents who have these concerns and these issues. And so when we were first kind of introduced to Iman, which is the Inner City Muslim Action Network, it was around this corner store campaign. And so we were still very new. It's probably like 2012, 2011. And we had a resident who was like, I know some of these corner stores, I know some of the owners. If we want to test out something, and it was really a redesign of the corner store, we should start here at 63rd and Racine. And so Patricia Cunningham, who's a faithful Rage member, talked to the owner, talked about our campaign in terms of really having fresh produce, readily available, access to it as soon as you walk into the store. And so that kind of started the journey and started the talks. The owner left, and then the store actually burned down, but Iman and Rage and so many others were still steadfast to redevelop this store and also redevelop this intersection. And so for us, having this be like kind of place-based making, like making sure that 63rd and Racine had alternatives to the gas station that is on 63rd and Racine that most people use for food. They go, they buy sandwiches there, they get those hot chips, they get those sugary drinks at the local gas station. So we just wanted an alternative solution at this intersection. And also to spark development, also to look at the corridor in general, while most people were focused on 63rd and Halsted. We said, hey, don't miss out on 63rd and Racine. Racine is a family kind of corridor, like from Dion's refrigerator on 57 through all the way to 76 to the skating rink. Families are on this corridor. They're riding the buses. They're getting off. They're on 63rd. So it kind of morphed into not only opening of the fresh market, It's also advocacy around opening the green line. So we're looking at equity, transit-oriented development. Why is our green line actually closed, that people are not able to get where they have to go to get to jobs downtown? And so it's holistic. The Fresh Market is one solution. When we started the Go Green on Racine kind of collaborative, we initially did it as a part of the Chicago Prize. And so Teamwork Inglewood, E.G. Wood, Rage, and Iman, basically worked together to do this application for the Chicago Prize while the Fresh Market was already underway. And so we were able to basically meet the financial gap that we had through the prize, become finalists, and get the store open. And now we just celebrated a year. Now, it is not huge. It is not supposed to be the Whole Foods. If Whole Foods closed, this is where you go. It's not that. It's a neighborhood corner store, and that's exactly what we want to keep it as. But we also want to have options, like this can't be it. Just like Whole Foods can't be it, Save a Lot can't be it, Aldi's can't be it. We need a variety. And I always go back to like the north side. When I'm on the north side, I see everything. I see Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, Aldi's, Mariano's, all on one block. Whereas people tell us, in Inglewood, oh, Whole Foods closed, you have the Fresh Market. We want alternatives. We want different variety, different tiers of options. But I think at the end of the day, we just want access to fresh food. We want to be able to get some good strawberries. We want to be able to have lemons and limes that are not, molded. I mean, and so for us being a neighborhood association and living here, that's all we say. And how that show up and how that advocacy may, come across to other operators or retailers, we don't care. At the end of the day, we live here and we know we are deserving of healthy food and access to healthy food. So Go Green, and on the 16th, just to put a plug out, it'll be 50% off at the Fresh Market. So please come back on June 16th as a celebration for Juneteenth. I will put the link to the Fresh Market also so you can follow that. But yeah, we're still heavily involved. We also are now working on the vacant school. Like I said, we had a vacant store, we have a vacant train line, we have a vacant school, and we have vacant storefronts in the area. And the Go Green on Racine is a holistic approach to all those things. And our anchor project was the Fresh Market.
Thank you so much. Such incredible work. And again, please go visit this weekend, get your groceries. It's an incredible, small but mighty store with like beautiful options. Jermaine, I want to kick it to you now, and humble flex. You were recently featured as a panelist for President Biden's White House conference on hunger, nutrition, and health. And so I'm curious if you could tell us just a little bit more about what you learned from there and what some key takeaways were from that meeting.
Just quickly, for those who may not be aware of what the conference was about, the last time we held a national conference that hunger, nutrition, and health was in 1969, right? Like 50 something years ago was the last time we convened to have an actual national strategy. So when Dion talks about the way we deliver things being antiquated, that's absolutely one of the reasons why. But out of that, there were like about 1,800 recommendations that included expanding school lunch programs and also the creation of WIC, right? So there's some major advancements that can come out of this opportunity. So we figured out like maybe we should probably look into this again. So having an opportunity to be at the conference really was one of the specific reasons, right? I showed up as a police officer. And again, people are asking like, why are you here? What's this idea? And so really, I wanted to make sure that the message was put in place around violence and around public safety. Until people's basic needs are met, there is no way I can do my job. Until we address basic needs, there's no way we're going to have any conversations about gun violence or any reductions of crime within our communities. And so really understanding that this as a root cause issue, I wanted to again disrupt the narrative in that way. But really what came out of this new national strategy, I'm going to share it here so people can take a look. It'll be in the chat with a couple of links. But really looking at that national strategy, there was five kind of key pillars that we wanted to focus on. But the first pillar was improving food access and affordability, right? Of course. Second pillar was integrating nutrition and health, right? Integrating this concept into everything we do, because again, it is an essential basic need. Third pillar being empowering all consumers to make and have access to healthier choices, right? That's the education. What foods do you eat? What do these do to your bodies? Aisha talked about this, right? The difference between eating something healthy that picks you up versus something that puts you to sleep, right? And the fourth pillar being support physical activity for all. That was where I was a part of that panel and talking about young people and getting them physically fit and being active. And really the idea was, I can't do that work unless they're nourished, right? They can't be physically active. They can't run. They're not going to be able to push their bodies to be fit and to be healthy. And those things can't happen unless they're properly nourished, right? And then the final piece is enhancing nutrition and food security research, right? This idea around what are we tracking? What are those metrics? What does the data tell us, right? To be better informed within the work. And so really in this opportunity to have so many people from around the country talk about this concern, here's the thing that can always bring us back. The issues that we face in Chicago around the challenges that we have with inequity, these things are universal to our entire nation. You can go to any part of America, you can go to within any community, even those that appear to be so well off like Chicago, where we have some of the richest, wealthiest people in the world, but you go into certain communities and you see this major disinvestment that play out. So I think that was one of those key things to understand, that we this collective pain we all can face regardless of our demographics. But if we're going to do work here in Chicago, there is a particular group, there's a particular communities where their work has to be centered. And so just bringing back that national idea right here within Chicago. So I think some of those ways begins with the way we build on a national strategy, the way we build on this work. I think it starts with the first step that you all are taking here today is to participate in the conversations, to raise your awareness, to understand from experts, from individuals who are doing the work every single day through lived experiences, right? These that are working within their communities, that understand what it's like, right? To be in a space like this and then do work to try and help others move away from it or become better supported. I think it's important for us to have those conversations and hear from people that have that specific set of skills and set of experiences. That's where it starts. But then I'm sure we'll get to this right at the end, is where it then becomes a challenge, right? What is our challenge then to take this from this moment with us sitting and listening, and where do we move that to? I know the way personally I do it is that I become an advocate for access, right? And we all can do those things when we're armed with the education. And so bringing back some of those lessons from the conference, here's a way to get connected in the challenge that was created. So also in the second link that I sent you was the White House challenge to end hunger and build healthy communities. Here's an opportunity for us to connect our work to this larger national strategy. And out of that, there's investments that come federally, right? That specifically within money. So there was a couple pledges. I think it was $8 billion that the president pledged to put forward towards this cause. And there's an opportunity to sign up to be part of that challenge and part of that commitment to move those 5 pillars. And this is a way, again, to connect our work, to figure out ways we draw more attention, we get more eyes, we get more leaders, we get more advocates that are all moving in the same direction, right? That are following the leadership and guidance of those with lived experiences. And so that's just the piece that I take away from being a part of something larger that's happening within the concept of our government. But then how does that really translate and trickle down, to lack of a better word, right, to actually our communities and within our neighbors? And I think that's where we come in. That becomes our responsibilities and our roles, right, as people who advocate for access.
Thanks, Jermaine. And I'm sad to say that we have just about 5 minutes left, and I probably have 1,000 more questions I could ask all of you. And so reminding everyone that we will have a breakout after this, so there will be space for you to ask questions in those breakout rooms. But as someone who's a firm believer in an assets-based approach and the power of our words, whether that's prayer, affirmation, etc., I would love, we've talked about a lot of problems today, but I think it's important for us to look towards the future and vision what this disruption will take us to. So in a short closing, I would love to hear from each of you kind of your vision for the future for Chicago's food system. No pressure.
All right, I'll go. So I'll let the two like pros kind of close it out. I'm sure they got some thunder to go. So I'll go. So here's my idea. I was gonna bring it back, right? I'm gonna bring it back to just the everyday person, the person living into a community, the person who has privilege, right? And privilege manifests in a lot of ways. Sometimes privilege is the ability to have open the refrigerator and foods it is inside. Right? That is a privilege, right? And as we understand that and we possess that to understand there's a power and there's an ability and there's ways we can leverage and support our privilege. And that's everyone's responsibility. For far too long, too many of us have been sitting on a bench, right? Watching things happen to other people, watching things happen in other places. But there are so many great leaders that are inside communities providing us this ability to exert some of that privilege. We all know a person that we could talk to that could maybe leverage support in the direction of organizations that are doing work. We all have the ability to have conversations amongst our peers and amongst our groups to raise that awareness of the challenges. So I think my vision and my hope is that we all start exercising our privilege, whatever that may look like, whatever power or ability that is to reach. But that is a responsibility that we all have towards humanity, towards mankind, towards our fellow Chicago, and we have that responsibility to start exerting that privilege. All right, I don't know who want to go, so we'll see.
Just run back just what does just run back the question one more time. I was making notes.
Yeah, no, our vision for Chicago's food system in the future.
So that's a really loaded question. And I think when I think about the food system, I just think like it's not to just like, we need to look at everything. I think the food system needs to be impacted by our economic system, and it's impacted by our housing, it's impacted by our schools, our education. And so I think if we had like an innovative food system, some of these other things will also be cured within that process. And so if it was ideal, as Jermaine said, access would not be an issue. We wouldn't need disruptors because everyone would have access and privilege to fresh and healthy options. People will have access to grow food if necessary. We will have access to groups like Dion Chicago Dream if that's another alternative. We will have access to build our own grocery stores, coming from community with community. I think that would be a more holistic approach to how Chicago can be a greater food system. I do think dismantling what has happened in the past and really adapting to today's society, adapting to flexible, innovative ideas. That's not, and I think Dion kept mentioning this, that's not this pantry model. We are changing with times. Even grocery stores are now about experiences, right? We have, we want an experience when we go into a grocery store. We don't want this to feel like a chore. We want to hang out. We want to drink. We want to hear music. And so really adapting to this, evolving society that wants places where food exists to be a loving experience. And I think if nothing else, we've all looked at food as typically a loving experience, and like making sure that we have that relationship with food that is not, activism and advocacy over just having fresh food. It should be a loving experience, and for anyone who is in that field. So that's where I'll go with that one. And I know Dion got some sharp to say.
I'm gonna get through it real quick, I promise. When we're talking about food equity and talking about the Chicago region food system, first and foremost, now and in the future, it has to be informed. Number one, we need to know, the different parts of the food system and how we can interact with it. We have to know where the things in the food system comes from. Everyone that knows me knows I'm a big fan of fact over fiction. I'm looking at 990s. I'm looking at where food is coming from, because we'll think that there's a myriad of selection when the 10 options all get their food from the same place. And so number one, if we're talking about equity, understanding what that really means and how we're making space and making sure that we're informed. Also, understanding that we have to be connected. So understanding that there has to be some baseline in the Chicago region for who's doing the work, how well they're doing in the work, and what needs to be better. Action-oriented, understanding that I'm not waiting on anybody. I'm not a victim. I'm a proud Inglewood native, and I've gotten all of my strength, not only inside my organization, but also as a community leader from my community. And I understand that I'm not gonna wait, which is leading to my last point, which is meeting the moment. Understanding that I can't look at what the food system used to be. I can't look at what I want it to be. I have to look at the hand that we're dealt now and make sure that the solutions that we're crafting is not only meeting this moment in terms of retail, in terms of philanthropy, but also in terms of the residents now. The residents now, may not have as much home ownership as they used to have. They may not have as much cash on hand as they used to have, but you know what? They have something. And so making sure that we're resilient enough to build on what we have now in order to get to where we need to go and then keep learning and applying. I think that's what we will want from the food system.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to think about the future of our food system with leaders like you and who are disrupting, who are building, who are challenging, who are innovating. So thank you for sharing this Zoom room with me, and thank you everyone for listening to us.